I'm 73 years old, and yesterday I sat alone in my kitchen with a birthday cake I'd bought for myself. 3 candles. 1 for each of my children. I lit them all, made a wish and blew them out in silence. The smoke curled up toward the ceiling, and I watched it disappear, just like I seemed to have disappeared from my children's lives. But here's what they don't know yet. Here's what none of them could possibly understand as they go about their busy, important lives in their expensive homes and their luxury cars. That silent birthday, that forgotten mother sitting alone. She was about to become the biggest mistake of their lives. You see, 3 months ago, I discovered something. Something my late husband Arthur had hidden from me for 40 years. Something that changed everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and the power I actually held. And when I found it, when I understood what it meant, I realized I had a choice to make. I could keep being the forgotten mother, the invisible woman my children called twice a year out of obligation. Or I could teach them the kind of lesson that would echo through generations. I chose the lesson. And God help me. I chose it with a smile on my face and ice in my veins. My name is Margaret Hayes, and this is the story of how I made my children remember me. Not with love, but with regret so profound it would reshape their entire understanding of what they'd thrown away. Let me take you back 6 months, before the discovery, before everything changed. Back when I was still just a foolish old woman who believed that unconditional love meant accepting crumbs from the table of my children's lives. I lived in the same modest ranch house in Greenfield where Arthur and I had raised our 3 kids, David, Jennifer, and Michael. Arthur had been gone for 18 months by then. And the silence in that house had become its own kind of companion. I'd wake up each morning, make coffee for one, and sit at the kitchen table where we'd shared 42 years of breakfasts together. My children had scattered like dandelion seeds across the country. David, my eldest at 47, was a corporate attorney in Manhattan. Jennifer, 44, had married a tech executive and lived in a sprawling home in Seattle. Michael, my baby at 41, was a financial consultant in Dallas. All successful, all wealthy, all too busy to remember where they came from. I'd raised them in that house on a schoolteacher's salary and Arthur's income as an electrician. We'd scrimped and saved, denied ourselves vacations and luxuries, so they could have music lessons and college funds and opportunities we'd never known. I'd sewn Jennifer's prom dress by hand, because we couldn't afford to buy one. I'd worked summer school every year so David could go to law school debt-free. I'd taken a second job as a library aide so Michael could have his own laptop for college. They'd promised, all of them, that they'd never forget what we'd sacrificed. They'd said they'd take care of me when I got older, that I'd never be alone. The phone calls had started out weekly after Arthur died, then monthly, then every few months. Now, I was lucky if I heard from any of them on major holidays, and even then, it was rushed, a 5-minute obligation squeezed between their real lives. I told myself it was fine. They were busy. They had their own families, their own pressures. I understood. But understanding doesn't fill the silence. Understanding doesn't warm you when you're eating dinner alone for the 350th night in a row. Understanding doesn't stop you from checking your phone every hour, hoping for a text that never comes. 3 months before my 73rd birthday, my neighbor Carol found me crying in my backyard garden. I'd been pulling weeds from Arthur's rose bushes. He'd loved those roses, and something had just broken inside me. Maybe it was the fact that Jennifer had canceled our monthly video call for the 3rd time. Maybe it was that David had forgotten my birthday the year before, and hadn't even apologized when I gently reminded him a week later. Maybe it was that Michael had hung up on me mid-sentence because he had a really important meeting. Carol sat with me on the garden bench, held my hand, and let me cry. When I finally stopped, I told her everything. I told her how David's wife had made it clear I wasn't welcome to visit without an invitation. I told her how Jennifer had stopped answering when I called, letting it go to voicemail, then texting back hours later with "sorry, so busy, talk soon." I told her how Michael had actually said the words, "I don't have time for this," when I'd called to tell him about my doctor finding a suspicious spot on my last mammogram. It had been benign, thank God. But he'd never asked about the follow-up. Never checked if I was okay. Carol looked at me with such pity in her eyes that I felt ashamed. Ashamed that I'd become this pathetic creature. This burden my children had grown tired of carrying. Margaret, she said carefully, have you thought about what happens when you really need them? When you can't live alone anymore? I had thought about it. Late at night, I thought about it constantly. I imagined myself falling, lying on the floor for hours before anyone noticed. I imagined getting sick, really sick, and having no one to drive me to appointments or sit with me through treatments. I imagined dying alone in this house, and no one discovering my body until the mail piled up enough for someone to call for a welfare check. But I pushed those thoughts away. They'll come if I really need them, I told Carol. I needed to believe that. I needed to believe I hadn't raised 3 people capable of true abandonment. Carol squeezed my hand. I hope you're right. 2 weeks later, everything changed. I'd been going through Arthur's things slowly, painfully. 18 months after his death, I still hadn't touched his office. A small converted bedroom where he'd kept his important papers, his tools catalogs, his collection of old electrical engineering magazines. I'd avoided it because opening that door felt like admitting he was really gone. But my accountant needed Arthur's tax documents from 5 years back for some IRS audit issue. And I finally forced myself to go digging through his filing cabinets. The first cabinet was exactly what I expected. Utility bills, insurance documents, old tax returns neatly labeled and organized. Arthur had always been meticulous about paperwork. The second cabinet was locked. I'd never noticed it before. Why would I? Arthur had handled all our finances, all the important documents. I'd trusted him completely. But now, staring at that locked drawer, I felt a strange flutter in my chest. Curiosity mixed with something darker. Why lock a filing cabinet in your own home office? It took me 20 minutes to find the key, hidden in an old coffee can on the top shelf of his closet, underneath several rolls of electrical tape. My hands shook as I slid it into the lock. Inside that drawer was 40 years of secrets, and the first document I pulled out made my entire world tilt sideways. It was a statement from an investment account I'd never heard of. Fletcher & Sons Investment Management. The account holder was listed as Arthur Hayes, Trust for Margaret Hayes. The balance made me sit down hard on Arthur's desk chair. $12,347,000. I stared at those numbers until they blurred. I blinked. Rubbed my eyes. Looked again. Still the same numbers. Still impossible. My hands trembled as I pulled out more documents. Another investment account. A real estate holding company. Stocks. Bonds. Properties. Rental properties in 3 different states, all managed by a property management company I'd never heard of. There was a letter, dated 6 months before Arthur's death, in his handwriting. My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, I'm gone and I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for keeping this from you, and I'm sorry I won't be there to explain it properly. Do you remember my Uncle Frank, who died when we were first married? He left me a substantial inheritance with very specific conditions. I couldn't tell you about it, legally, contractually. He was terrified his wealth would corrupt his family, that they'd become dependent on it rather than making their own way. His trust documents required absolute secrecy until the inheritor reached age 65 or passed away, whichever came first. I've managed this money carefully for 40 years. I've grown it, invested it, and protected it. It's ours, my love. It's always been ours, even though I couldn't tell you. I kept us living modestly, because I wanted our children to grow up with the same values we had. The dignity of earning what you have, the pride in building your own life. I wanted them to be strong, independent, capable people, not trust fund children who never understood the value of a dollar. I was going to tell you on my 65th birthday. We were going to travel, enjoy our retirement, maybe buy that cottage by the lake you always dreamed about. But my heart had other plans. The money is yours now, Margaret. All of it. I've set up everything with Robert Fletcher at Fletcher & Sons. He has all the documents, all the instructions. Call him. He's expecting you eventually. I love you. I'm sorry I kept this secret. But I hope you understand. I did it to protect our children from becoming the kind of people who value money over character. Forever yours, Arthur. I read that letter 5 times. Then I called the number on the investment statement with shaking fingers. Robert Fletcher confirmed everything. $12 million. properties generating over $40,000 a month in rental income, a portfolio designed for growth and security. All of it, every penny mine. I hung up the phone and sat in Arthur's office as the afternoon light faded to darkness around me. My husband had been a secret millionaire. We'd been wealthy for 40 years and I'd never known. I'd worked 2 jobs to send our kids to college. I'd bought my clothes at thrift stores. I'd declined dental work because it seemed too expensive, all while sitting on a fortune that could have made everything so much easier. Arthur's reasoning made sense, intellectually. He'd wanted our children to be self-made, not spoiled. He'd wanted them to have character. But here's what he didn't live to see. They'd become successful and wealthy on their own. And in the process, they'd learn to value money and status over everything else, including me. The lesson Arthur had tried to teach them had backfired spectacularly. They hadn't learned humility and hard work. They'd learned that poor people like their parents appeared to be, weren't worth their time. I closed Arthur's letter carefully, placed it back in the drawer, and made a decision that would change all of our lives forever. If my children had forgotten me because they thought I was just a poor old woman with nothing to offer them, then I would show them exactly what they'd thrown away. But first, I needed to see just how far they'd fallen. I needed to test them one more time, give them one more chance to prove me wrong. I needed them to forget my birthday. The next 3 months were a masterclass in disappointment, and I documented every moment of it with a clarity that surprised me. Maybe Arthur's revelation had burned away whatever illusions I'd been clinging to. Maybe I finally had the courage to see my children as they really were. I started with small tests, casual mentions of doctor's appointments and phone calls, to see if they'd follow up. They never did. I told Jennifer I'd had a small fender bender in the grocery store parking lot. Nothing serious, but it had shaken me up. She said, "Oh, that's scary," and immediately changed the subject to her daughter's piano recital. I told David my furnace was making strange noises, and I was worried about carbon monoxide. He suggested I call a repairman, and didn't ask about it again. I told Michael I'd been feeling dizzy lately, losing my balance. He said I should probably get that checked out, and then spent 20 minutes talking about his promotion. None of them asked follow-up questions. None of them called back to check on me. None of them seemed to notice, or care, that their mother was struggling. But the birthday was the real test. I'd told each of them, separately, in casual conversation, that this birthday felt important to me. That 73 was significant because it was how old Arthur's mother had been when she'd passed, and it made me feel my own mortality. That I'd love to see them, even on video call, even for just a few minutes. David had said, "Sure, Mom, we'll definitely call." Jennifer had said, "I'll try, Mom, but Kaylee has soccer that weekend." Michael had said, "Yeah, sounds good." My birthday fell on a Saturday. I woke up that morning with my phone next to my pillow, volume turned all the way up, certain that surely at least one of them would call. By noon, nothing. By 6 p.m., nothing. By 10 p.m., as I sat with that ridiculous cake and 3 candles, I had to accept the truth. They'd all forgotten. Or worse, they'd remembered and simply hadn't cared enough to take 5 minutes out of their day. I took a photo of that cake, those 3 lit candles, my empty kitchen. I saved it to a folder on my computer labeled Evidence. The next morning, I called Robert Fletcher and told him I was ready to discuss my options. We met at his office in the city, a gleaming tower I'd driven past 1,000 times without ever imagining I had any business there. Robert was a kind man in his 60s who'd clearly been fond of Arthur. He greeted me with genuine warmth and led me to a conference room with a view of the river. "Mrs. Hayes," he said gently, "Arthur talked about you constantly. He was so proud of your strength, your kindness. He wanted this money to give you freedom and security. So, what can I do for you?" I told him everything. The abandonment, the forgotten birthday, the years of being invisible. I could hear my voice cracking, but I pushed through. "I want to give them a chance," I said finally. "One real chance to show me they still care, that I'm still their mother. And if they fail," I looked Robert directly in the eye, "if they fail, I want to teach them the kind of lesson Arthur would have been proud of. Can you help me with that?" Robert Fletcher smiled slowly. "Mrs. Hayes, I think your husband would have loved what you're about to do." The plan we crafted was beautiful in its simplicity and devastating in its potential impact. First, we created a situation that would require my children to come home. A crisis they couldn't ignore. I would have a medical emergency. Severe chest pains that landed me in the hospital overnight. Nothing life-threatening, but scary enough that any decent child would drop everything and come. Robert had a contact at Greenfield Memorial Hospital, and for a generous donation to their cardiac wing, they agreed to facilitate the scenario. I would check in, undergo some tests, stay overnight for observation, and be released the next day with a clean bill of health, but strict instructions to reduce stress and increase family support. The hospital would call each of my children personally to inform them their mother had been rushed to the emergency room with chest pains. Second, I would create a living trust document, signed, sealed, and completely legal, that laid out exactly what would happen to my estate based on how my children responded to this crisis. If they came immediately, dropped everything to be by my bedside, showed real care and concern, the money would be split equally among them after my death, with generous monthly stipends starting immediately to make their lives easier. If they made excuses, delayed, or didn't come at all, they'd get exactly what they'd given me, nothing. Everything would go to charities, scholarships for underprivileged kids, animal shelters, causes that actually gave a damn. The document also included a twist that made Robert actually laugh out loud. Before they learned about any of this, before they knew about the money, I would make a final request to each of them for help. A simple, genuine need. The money was one test. But character? Character would be tested by how they treated me when they thought I still had nothing to offer them. I scheduled my emergency for 3 weeks after my birthday. 3 weeks to give them a chance to remember they'd forgotten, to reach out, to apologize. 3 weeks of silence that solidified my resolve. The night before I checked into the hospital, I wrote 3 letters, one to each of my children. I sealed them in envelopes with instructions to Robert Fletcher. These were to be delivered only if they failed every test. Only if they proved beyond doubt that they'd forgotten who'd raised them. The next morning, I drove myself to Greenfield Memorial, checked in under the prearranged plan, and let the staff hook me up to monitors and machines. The doctor on duty, Dr. Sarah Chun, who was in on the plan, made a show of looking concerned, ordering tests, insisting I stay overnight. Then she called my children. I watched the clock from my hospital bed. Watched and waited. David was first to call me back, 2 hours later. His secretary had left him the message during a meeting. "Mom, are you okay? What happened?" I explained the chest pains, the ER visit, the overnight stay. I made my voice weak, scared. "Do you need me to come?" he asked, and I could hear him typing on his computer while we talked. "I would love that," I said softly. "I'm scared, David. They're running all these tests and I'm alone and, Mom, I'm in the middle of a huge case. I've got a deposition in 2 days that's been scheduled for months. Can you put a nurse on? Let me talk to your doctor." He talked to Dr. Chin for 5 minutes. She told him I was stable, likely just anxiety or indigestion, but they wanted to monitor me. "See, Mom," David said when he got back on the line. "You're fine. They're just being cautious. I'll call you tomorrow to check in, okay?" He called 2 days later. Jennifer's response was even more revealing. She called back 30 minutes after the hospital reached her. I'll give her that. But her first words were, "Mom, you need to stop scaring me like this." Scaring her like this. As if I'd given myself chest pains for attention. I told her the same story. She listened with half attention. I could hear her kids screaming in the background. "Mom, look, you know this is Kaylee's championship weekend, right? Brad and I have been planning this for months. We've got a hotel booked. The whole team is counting on us to organize the parent reception, and..." "I understand," I said quietly. "Of course. The championship is important. You're okay, right? I mean, the doctor said you're okay?" "They think so." "Then I'll call you after the weekend. We'll video chat, and you can tell me all about it. I promise. Love you, Mom. Gotta run." She called 4 days later, for 12 minutes. Michael didn't call at all. He texted. "Hospital said you're fine. Glad it's nothing serious. Let's talk next week. Busy with client crisis." I wrote back, "I love you. I wish you were here." He responded with a thumbs up emoji. A thumbs up emoji to his mother in the hospital. I spent that night staring at the ceiling of my hospital room. And something inside me calcified into diamond-hard resolve. Carol had asked me what would happen when I really needed them. Now I knew. When I was released the next morning with my fake diagnosis of stress-related chest pain and recommendations for more family support, I stopped by Robert Fletcher's office. They all failed, I said simply. He nodded. I'm sorry, Margaret. Don't be. Now we move to phase 2. Phase 2 was cruel. I knew it was cruel, but it was also just. I called each of my children over the following week with a simple, humble request, the kind any aging parent might make of their successful children. To David I said, "Honey, my roof is leaking badly, and the roofer quoted me $8,000. I don't have that in savings. Could you possibly help me? I could pay you back over time." To Jennifer I said, "Sweetie, my car died. The mechanic says it's not worth fixing. I found a decent used one for $5,000, but I'm short. Could you possibly lend me the money? I hate to ask." To Michael I said, "Baby, I'm having trouble making ends meet. My property taxes went up, and I'm $600 short. Could you help me out? Just this once." $8,000. $5,000. $600. Amounts that were pocket change to them. Less than they spent on a nice dinner out. Nothing. David said he'd have to check with his wife, and never brought it up again. Jennifer said times were really tight, because they were renovating their kitchen and had just bought Brad a new Tesla. Michael said $600 was actually a lot right now, because they just booked a European vacation. I thanked them all. Told them not to worry about it. Told them I'd figure it out. And I did figure it out. I paid for all of it with my $12 million. I paid cash for a brand new roof, not just repairs. I bought myself a brand new luxury car, not a used one. I paid my property taxes a year in advance. And then I called Robert Fletcher and said, "Execute the plan." The plan was elegantly simple. I would move. Leave Greenfield, leave my old life, and start over somewhere new. I'd buy a beautiful house in a retirement community in Charleston, South Carolina, somewhere warm and lovely where I'd always wanted to live. I'd make new friends. I'd take art classes and join book clubs and travel. But before I left, my children would get one final invitation. Come visit me one last time before I move away. Just one weekend. Bring your families. Let me cook for you one more time in the house where you grew up. If they came, if they gave me one weekend, there might still be hope for reconciliation. If they didn't, the letters would be sent. I sent the invitations via both text and formal letters in the mail. Beautiful cards with handwritten notes inside. I picked a weekend 6 weeks out to give them plenty of notice. I told them it would mean the world to me, that I missed them so much, that I wanted one last memory in our family home before I started this new chapter. David responded first. "Mom, that's Labor Day weekend. We have plans at the Hamptons. Can you do the weekend after?" The weekend after, I'd be moved out. The house would be empty. I texted back. "That's the weekend the movers come. I really need it to be Labor Day weekend. Please, David. Just this once." He read the message. Didn't respond. Jennifer called me sounding stressed. "Mom, Labor Day weekend is when Brad's parents are visiting from Europe. They only come once a year. You understand, right? Maybe we can visit you in Charleston at Christmas?" "Of course," I said. "I understand." Michael didn't respond at all for 3 weeks. Finally he texted, "Sorry Mom, can't make it. Really slammed at work. Good luck with the move." Good luck with the move. 7 words after I'd begged him to give me one weekend in 30 years of Labor Day weekends. I sat in Arthur's office, my office now, and opened the drawer containing those 3 sealed letters. I held them in my hands, feeling their weight. This was it. The moment of no return. Once Robert mailed these letters, once my children read what was inside, there would be no going back. No relationship to salvage. No reconciliation possible. I thought about backing out. I thought about how Arthur might have counseled mercy, second chances, unconditional love. But then I remembered something Arthur had said to me once years ago, When David had been caught bullying a smaller kid at school, Arthur had sat our son down and said, "The true measure of a person's character isn't how they treat people who can do something for them. It's how they treat people who can do nothing for them at all." My children had shown me their character. Over and over. I was someone who could do nothing for them. A poor old widow with nothing to offer but need and inconvenience, and they treated me accordingly. I called Robert Fletcher and told him to mail the letters. They arrived on the Tuesday after Labor Day weekend. Each letter was identical in structure, though personalized with specific examples of their failures. Each contained a detailed account of every time they'd forgotten me, ignored me, or dismissed my needs over the past 2 years. The results of their tests, the medical emergency they hadn't come for, the money they'd refused to lend, the weekend they couldn't spare, the revelation of Arthur's fortune, and my true financial situation, the legal trust document showing how my estate would have been divided if they'd passed the tests, and what they would now receive instead. A final paragraph that I'd written and rewritten a dozen times, trying to make them understand. I raised you to be kind, compassionate, successful people who understood the value of family and love. Instead, you became exactly what your father feared, people who measure worth in dollars and status. You didn't abandon me because you're busy. You abandoned me because you thought I had nothing left to offer you. This money was always meant to make your lives easier eventually, but you didn't earn it. You didn't pass the test your father set for you years ago by choosing to be self-made. And you certainly didn't pass the test I set for you by choosing to value success over family. I will live comfortably for the rest of my life. I will travel, pursue hobbies, make new friends, and finally experience the freedom this money can provide. And when I die, every penny will go to organizations that understand the value of caring for people who have nothing to give in return. You'll get exactly what you gave me. Nothing. I hope someday you have children. I hope they grow up to become the kind of people you've become. And when they forget your birthdays, ignore your medical emergencies, and refuse to spare you a weekend of their time, I hope you remember this moment and finally understand what you did to me. I won't be taking your calls anymore. My lawyer has instructions not to share my new address. You're free now. Free from the burden of pretending to care about your mother. I hope it was worth it. Goodbye. Margaret. The calls started within hours. David first, frantic voicemails saying this had to be some kind of mistake, that we needed to talk, that he could explain. The explaining came in the form of accusations. I was being manipulative, cruel, playing games with them. How dare I test them? How dare I keep the money secret? This wasn't fair. Jennifer called crying, saying I was breaking her heart, that she'd always loved me, that she was sorry, so sorry. But her apology was punctuated with, "Mom, you can't give everything to charity. That's not what Dad would have wanted. We're your children. We deserve." Deserve. That word again. Michael sent a series of texts, then an email, then called from different numbers when I blocked his. His messages cycled through every stage of manipulation. Anger, bargaining, justification, blame. It was my fault for not telling them about the money sooner. It was my fault for setting them up to fail. It was my fault for having unreasonable expectations. None of them, not one, ever simply said, "You're right. We failed you. We're sorry." I blocked all their numbers. I blocked their emails. I had Robert Fletcher send cease and desist letters when they started showing up at my old house, which I'd already sold. I moved to Charleston into a beautiful cottage 3 blocks from the ocean. I joined a painting class and discovered I was actually quite good. I made friends with my neighbors, women my age who'd also built new lives after loss. I traveled to Italy, to Scotland, to Peru, all the places Arthur and I had dreamed about. I started a scholarship fund for underprivileged kids in Greenfield, named after Arthur. Every year, I personally selected 3 students who demonstrated not just academic excellence but kindness, empathy, and service to others. I was happy. Genuinely, surprisingly happy. But here's the thing about regret. It doesn't just belong to me. 6 months after I'd moved, I got a letter forwarded from my old address. It was from Jennifer. She'd found my P.O. box address somehow. The letter was different from her initial reaction. It was written in the middle of the night, she said. She couldn't sleep. Her daughter Kaylee had asked her, "Grandma, why don't we ever see Nana anymore?" Jennifer had tried to explain, some version of events that made her look less culpable, I'm sure. But Kaylee, at 12 years old, had said something that shattered her. "But Nana was always so nice to me. Why were we too busy for her?" The letter went on for pages. Jennifer talked about how she'd been reflecting, really reflecting, on how she'd treated me, how she'd taken me for granted, how she'd let the demands of her own life blind her to mine. She didn't make excuses. She didn't ask for forgiveness or money. She just said, "You were right, Mom. I became someone you wouldn't have been proud of. And I don't know how to fix it, but I'm trying. I'm trying to be better, to teach my kids better. I'm volunteering at a senior center now. I'm calling Brad's mother every week, actually listening to her stories. It's not enough. It doesn't change what I did to you. But I want you to know I finally understand." I cried reading that letter. Not because it changed my mind. It didn't. The trust documents were ironclad, and I wouldn't alter them. But I cried because maybe, just maybe, the lesson had landed with at least one of them. I wrote back. One letter. Short. "Jennifer, I'm glad you're becoming the person I tried to raise. I'm glad my grandchildren might grow up with better values. But understanding isn't the same as undoing. Some mistakes echo forever. I don't hate you. I want you to know that. I don't hate any of you. But I can't let you back in. The trust is gone, and at my age, I don't have time to rebuild it. Be better for your children. That's all I ever wanted. Mom." I never heard from Michael again. I heard through Carol, who still lived in Greenfield and kept tabs on such things, that he and his wife divorced. The stress of losing the potential inheritance had apparently revealed other cracks in their marriage. He blamed me for it in conversations with mutual acquaintances. I was the villain in his story. David tried to sue me, claiming Arthur had been mentally incompetent when he created the trust, that I'd manipulated a grieving widow's emotions. The lawsuit was thrown out in less than a month. Robert Fletcher had made sure every document was airtight. David wasted $50,000 on lawyers trying to break a trust he had no claim to. The irony wasn't lost on me. 5 years have passed now. I'm 78 years old. My health is good. My life is rich, not just with money but with purpose and peace. I still think about my children sometimes. I wonder if David's girls know that their grandmother exists. I wonder if Michael ever tells his story honestly. I wonder if Jennifer really did become better, or if that letter was just another manipulation. But mostly, I think about Arthur and that letter he left me. He wanted to protect our children from being corrupted by wealth. Instead, they were corrupted by its absence. Or rather, by their perception of my absence of wealth. The lesson here isn't about money. Money was just the tool I used to reveal who they'd become. The lesson is this. The way you treat people when they have nothing to offer you. That's your character. That's your legacy. My children thought they were too important, too busy, too successful to spare time for a poor old widow. They were wrong about me being poor. But I was right about who they'd become. I don't regret what I did. Some people call me cruel when they hear this story. And yes, it gets around, even with my anonymity. People say a mother should forgive everything, should love unconditionally even when that love isn't returned. But here's what I learned. Unconditional love doesn't mean accepting unconditional disrespect. It doesn't mean letting your children treat you like you're worthless just because you raised them to fly. I taught them a lesson their father would have been proud of. I taught them that every person has value, even poor old widows in modest houses. I taught them that family is measured in actions, not words. I taught them that some mistakes can't be undone, no matter how much money you thought you were inheriting. I raised 3 children. I gave them everything I had, my time, my love, my sacrifices. And when they forgot my birthday, they forgot more than just a date on a calendar. They forgot who'd taught them to read, who'd sat up with them through nightmares, who'd believed in them when they doubted themselves. They forgot the woman who'd worked 2 jobs so they wouldn't have to. And by the time they remembered, it was too late. My birthday is next week. I'm having a party with my painting class friends. There will be cake and champagne and laughter. There will be people who chose to know me, who value me for who I am, not what I can give them. The phone won't ring with dutiful, obligatory calls from my children. And for the first time in years, that fact doesn't make me sad. It makes me free. Silence hides stories the world needs to hear. Help us share them, like, subscribe, and stay with the silent parents.